It was Kody. His voice was low, shaken. Robyn collapsed. He said, "I've called 911. We're at the hospital." The night had started peacefully. Robyn sitting upright in bed, gently debating the details of an upcoming family gathering. One moment she was engaged, animated, the next she slumped over. Her body trembled, her eyes unseeing. Kody had rushed to her, tried everything before the paramedics arrived. Now she lay surrounded by machines and the sterile quiet of a hospital room. The woman who once entered their lives humbly had grown into the center of the family's focus. And now, without warning, she lay still, her presence reduced to rhythmic beats and the shallow rise and fall of her chest. Doctors hovered, puzzled. No clear diagnosis. No clear cause. Just a strange silence and an overwhelming sense of imbalance. Kody roamed the halls like a man looking for answers in the cracks of white hospital tiles, murmuring quiet prayers to a faith he'd long ago bent in one direction. Back in Flagstaff, Janelle sat at her kitchen table, watching morning light fade behind clouds. She'd gotten Kody's call, but she wasn't surprised. She had felt something, some tension tightening around the family's foundation. Her first reaction wasn't fear, it was reflection. How many times had she tried to voice her concerns? To question why one wife's emotions weighed heavier than the promises they all once shared? Even early on, she'd sensed it. Imbalance disguised as grace, careful words masking quiet influence. And Kody had fallen for it, completely. Now it seemed consequences were catching up. "The house of cards is finally falling," Janelle whispered into her coffee. Across town, Meri wandered through her quiet garden, fingers brushing dried stems and dormant branches. The earth had become her comfort since being emotionally sidelined in the family. When she heard about Robyn, she didn't weep or pace, she listened. To the wind, to her intuition, to the silence that speaks louder than words. She had endured. She had watched her place crumble while another's rose. But she never let resentment grow roots. What she felt now wasn't vengeance. It was clarity. Meanwhile, in Robyn's hospital room, time stood still. Her body lay still, untouched by movement. But her mind had gone somewhere else entirely. She found herself in a dreamlike chamber, vast, radiant, soundless. The air shimmered, the floor hummed with energy. She stood barefoot in a plain white gown. No makeup, no adornments, no illusions. A figure stood before her, neither male nor female, neither warm nor cold, still and immense. It spoke without moving its lips. "You are not dead, but you are here to reflect." "On what?" Robyn asked, voice trembling. "On imbalance, on holding what was meant to be shared. On claiming sacrifice while others went without." Robyn's tears came quickly, the same tears that had often drawn Kody's sympathies. But here they vanished before hitting the floor. "You believed yourself the victim," the voice continued, "but you built the walls. You ascended by stepping on others. Now they no longer kneel." In the dream, Janelle and Meri appeared, not angry, not accusing, just present. Watching. "I only wanted love," Robyn whispered. "Did you love in return?" the voice asked. "Or did you fear losing control, so you kept it all to yourself?" No answer, only silence. Then hours later, her eyes fluttered open in the hospital bed. She blinked, confused but calm. The dream lingered like mist. Her gaze had shifted, no longer pleading or proud, but wide with awareness. Kody rushed to her side. "You're awake," he breathed, voice cracking. She didn't look at him yet. Not fully. "I saw," she whispered, "everything." Back in Flagstaff, Janelle read the text. She's awake. Meri stood barefoot in her garden, eyes closed, feeling the wind shift through the trees. The world felt different. Something had changed. Something had been broken, and perhaps something new was about to begin. The Brown family had been altered at the root. Whether Robyn had changed, whether Kody could, and whether the other women could ever forgive, that was up to time. But one thing was certain, the era of illusion was over. New beginnings. In the months that followed, the women began rebuilding, separately but stronger. Janelle, now living on a farm in North Carolina, was radiant in a new velvet gown at a local charity event. Her smile, genuine. Her stance, independent. She was no longer the second wife, she was simply Janelle, a mother, an entrepreneur, and a woman who had survived grief and found growth. Her eldest son, Garrison, had passed the year prior. The pain was still fresh. But somehow, life moved forward. The farm kept her grounded. The work gave her purpose. Her reflection now showed someone wiser, more whole. Christine, the first to leave, had already found new love with David Woolley. Their wedding had been intimate and joyful, a symbol of courage, not escape. She shared her journey openly, inspiring others to believe that joy after sorrow was possible. That leaving was not failure. It was faith in something better. Christine and Janelle, once distant, were now inseparable, traveling, laughing, even winning cruises for their health business. Sisterhood had been reinvented, not through shared marriage, but shared survival. Even Meri, once hesitant to let go, was discovering her voice. Her social media hinted at deep reflections. Posts spoke of discomfort in growth. She no longer filtered her truth. She was preparing to tell her story, on her own terms. The final chapter. As the dust settled, questions remained. Would Kody see what had been lost? Would Robyn become a different person, now that she'd glimpsed herself from the outside? Only time would reveal those answers. But as the women of the Brown family stepped into their own, one thing became clear. This wasn't just the end of a spiritual union. It was the beginning of individual legacies. And each of them, Meri, Janelle, Christine, Flagstaff was heavy, clouds hanging low over the mountains, the sun nowhere to be found. In the early morning, the hush swept through the Brown household like a warning. It was a silence that spoke of something deep unraveling. Robyn Brown had collapsed late the night before. Kody had found her curled on the floor, her breathing shallow, her skin pale. There had been no warning, only the sharp crack of something invisible breaking. Emergency lights flashed through the window blinds as paramedics rushed her away. Now she lay in a sterile hospital bed, surrounded by machines, her face pale beneath fluorescent lights. The doctors called it exhaustion, a vague diagnosis that did nothing to soothe the tension simmering across the once unified family. But far from the beeping monitors and white hallways, Janelle and Meri sat across from each other at a small cafe tucked into the corner of a dusty street. Both weary, both aware that something deeper than physical sickness was at play. "She's sick," Meri said quietly, stirring her tea without tasting it. Janelle didn't look up. Her eyes were fixed on the window, on the gray sky and the people walking by, without a clue of the storm brewing just beyond the veil of the television screens and tabloid headlines. "Yes," she answered, "but maybe it's more than that." Meri finally met her gaze. "You're thinking what I'm thinking." Janelle nodded. "This is the result of sin." The words landed like a stone dropped into still water, not as judgment, but as truth. As something long buried finally spoken aloud. The breaking point. For years, Robyn had been the favored wife, coddled, protected, defended. Kody had slowly shifted the entire emotional axis of the family in her direction. It started small, special attention, more time, whispered apologies. But over time it grew, until the family that once moved as a unit began to fracture under the weight of unspoken hierarchies and emotional inequity. Janelle had stayed the longest, enduring the loneliness of being invisible as she watched her husband transform into someone she barely recognized. Meri had remained even longer, caught in a cycle of yearning and rejection, her faith telling her to endure even when her heart had already started packing its bags. Now sitting together as women, no longer tied by spiritual covenant, but still bound by shared scars, they spoke plainly. "It wasn't always like this," Meri said. "We entered that life believing in something pure, but it changed." "No," Janelle said. "He changed, and we let it happen. We let the imbalance grow until there was nothing left to balance." Meri lowered her voice, but her tone sharpened. She accepted the favoritism. She took and watched the rest of us unravel. That's not love. That's something else. "Idolatry," Janelle whispered. "He put her on a pedestal, built her a throne out of our sacrifices." They sat in silence for a while, letting the memory of those long years swirl between them. Years filled with quiet dinners alone, family meetings that ended in tears, birthdays forgotten, and promises left to rot in cold storage units and unfurnished apartments. Now Robyn was the one laying still, and the ones who had endured the most were finally standing. The sin of imbalance. Neither woman said Robyn deserved to suffer. That wasn't the point. What they were saying, what they were finally brave enough to say out loud, was that when love is twisted into control, when devotion turns into obsession, and when faith is manipulated for convenience, the universe doesn't stay quiet forever. "There's a cost to spiritual imbalance," Janelle said. "You can't break a covenant over and over and expect no consequences, especially when you use God's name to justify it." Meri nodded. "You can't call it plural marriage and live a monogamous fantasy." It had been a long time coming. For too long, the family had portrayed a unity that no longer existed. Behind the cameras and curated Instagram posts, real pain had festered. Robyn, despite her tears, had often appeared untouched by the chaos that consumed the others. Her house was bigger, her time with Kody uninterrupted. And whether or not she asked for that favoritism, she never refused it. Janelle had watched her children grow distant from their father. Meri had lived through a silent divorce long before Kody admitted it publicly. Christine had been the first to walk away, but now Janelle and Meri realized they had left too, only in pieces. Now one heartbreak. The emotional storm had found its way to Robyn's doorstep. "God doesn't punish," Janelle said, "but he allows you to face what you've created." "And what we had wasn't love," Meri added. "It was control, fear, a spiritual system that became a performance." The hospital room. Meanwhile, Kody sat by Robyn's side, his face drawn and tired. He clutched her hand, whispering apologies and promises, many of which he'd once offered to Meri, to Janelle, and to Christine. But there were no cameras here, no spotlight, no carefully crafted story. Just the silence of a woman who had held too much for too long, and a man wondering where the path had gone so wrong. When Robyn stirred, her voice was hoarse. "Where are they?" she asked. Kody looked confused. "The nurses?" "No," she whispered. "Janelle, Meri, Christine." The name caught in her throat. For the first time, the weight of their absence hit her like cold water. They weren't coming. Not because they didn't care, but because they finally did. About themselves. About boundaries. About truth. She closed her eyes again, and a tear slipped down her cheek. Not for her own pain, but for all the time she had ignored theirs. A reckoning, not a curse. Back at the cafe, Janelle and Meri stood to leave. The sky had started to clear, just a little light peeking through the gray. "I don't hate her," Meri said softly. "I hope she heals. I hope we all do." Janelle nodded. But healing doesn't come without truth. They parted without ceremony, no hugs, no dramatic goodbyes. Just two women who had survived the same storm, walking away in different directions, but carrying the same truth in their hearts. The family they once knew was gone. But in its place, something new was rising. Not a shared marriage. Not a broken dream. But individual strength. Rooted in truth. Free of illusion. And perhaps, in the shadow of collapse, the Brown family would finally begin to rebuild, this time on a foundation that didn't require sacrifice from everyone but one. Epilogue. Robyn remained in recovery for weeks. Public statements were vague. Health complications, a time of rest. But the women who once called her sister wife knew better. It wasn't just physical. It was spiritual. A reckoning. And in that quiet space where illusions had finally been shattered, Janelle and Meri spoke their truth, not out of bitterness, but out of wisdom earned through years of pain. This is the result of sin, they said, not as a curse, but as a reckoning with choices made and lives disrupted. But where there's reckoning, there can also be redemption. And maybe, just maybe, that part of the story is still to come.